I am Harper, 34 years old, and until tonight, I thought I had built a tolerable life in Atlanta. My husband of 7 years had just raised his crystal glass to toast his own success at our anniversary dinner. Sitting next to him was my best friend, Chantel, and across from us were my sister-in-law, Ebony, and her white husband, Wyatt. When I pulled out the ultrasound photos of Chantel, carrying my husband's twins and dropped them right onto his expensive butter-poached lobster, the entire table went dead silent. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to destroy the perfect facade of a toxic family. The crystal chandelier above our table cast a warm golden glow over the private dining room at one of the most exclusive seafood restaurants in Buckhead. It was our 7th wedding anniversary. But you would never know it by listening to the conversation. Malik, my husband of 7 years, was holding court. He sat at the head of the table, wearing a tailored navy shoe suit that I had personally paid for, radiating the kind of unearned confidence that only a mediocre man propped up by a successful woman could muster. He swirled the expensive bourbon in his glass and smiled broadly at his sister Ebony and her husband Wyatt. "Let me tell you about hard work," Malik was saying, his voice booming with arrogant pride. "When I took over that maritime shipping fleet, people said the international logistics market was too saturated. They said a black man could not dominate the high-end freight game on the eastern seaboard. But look at us now, we just crushed our quarterly goals, and I am thinking about opening a second operational port by next spring. It takes vision to build an empire from the ground up." He paused, waiting for the praise he felt he was owed. Ebony clapped her hands together, leaning forward with a hungry gleam in her eyes. "That is what I am talking about, big brother. You are the true definition of a self-made man. In fact, since business is booming so much, Wyatt and I were hoping you could co-sign on our new commercial real estate application. The bank is giving us a hard time about Wyatt's fluctuate corporate risk assessment bonuses, but with your signature, we could close on that massive office space in Alpharetta by the end of the month." Malik puffed out his chest and waved his hand dismissively as if signing away hundreds of thousands of dollars was a trivial matter. "Say no more, Ebony. You know I always take care of my family. I will have my finance guy send over the paperwork tomorrow morning." "Family has to look out for family." Wyatt, sitting next to Ebony, adjusted his expensive silk tie and offered a condescending smile. He was a white corporate risk assessor who always seemed to carry a subtle air of superiority whenever he sat at our table. "I appreciate that, Malik. It is a tough market out there right now. You have to be aggressive. You have to take risks. I always tell my junior analysts that real men create their own luck. You built that shipping fleet with your own 2 hands, and that is something to respect." I sat quietly at the opposite end of the table, cutting my filet mignon with slow, deliberate motions. Not one of them mentioned where the massive capital for that shipping fleet actually came from. Not one of them acknowledged that my international supply chain conglomerate and my vast network of automated fulfillment centers had provided the $80 million collateral required to open those shipping lanes. To them, I was just the silent wallet, the cold corporate wife who was lucky to have such a charismatic man by her side. And then there was Chantel, my best friend since college, sitting right next to Malik. She was wearing a stunning emerald green silk dress that I had purchased for her birthday just 2 months ago. Chantel was an event planner who specialized in high-end yacht christenings and corporate galas, always hovering on the edges of Atlanta's elite circles, but never quite breaking through on her own absolute merit. She leaned over and placed her hand gently on Malik's forearm, her manicured fingers resting there just a second too long. "You really are an inspiration, Malik," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Harper is so lucky to have a man who provides so well for her. Most men would be intimidated by a woman who works as much as Harper does, but you just let her do her little warehouse logistics thing while you build the real legacy. I do not know how you do it." Malik patted her hand and gave her a warm, appreciative look. It takes a lot of patience, Chantel. You know how it is. Harper is married to her work. Someone has to be the anchor of this family. I stopped cutting my steak. I placed my knife and fork down on the pristine white tablecloth. The sheer audacity of the scene playing out in front of me was almost cinematic. For years, I had endured the subtle disrespect, the massive financial drain, and the emotional manipulation because I believed in the sanctity of marriage. I believed that family was paramount, but the truth was no longer something I could ignore. The private investigator I had hired 3 weeks ago had delivered a highly detailed, devastating file to my executive office that very morning. Malik raised his glass of bourbon, holding it up toward the chandelier. To 7 years of marriage, he announced, looking at me with a hollow, performative smile. And to the beautiful family we are building, may the next 7 years be even more fruitful. Ebony, Wyatt, and Chantel all raised their glasses. Cheers to the happy couple, Chantel said, locking eyes with me. I did not touch my glass. I reached down to the floor beside my chair and picked up my black quilted Chanel bag. The leather was soft under my fingers, a stark contrast to the cold fury currently freezing my veins. I unclasped the lock and reached inside, pulling out a thick manila envelope. Is that a gift? Ebony asked, leaning forward with sudden greedy interest. Did you get him the platinum Rolex he was looking at? No, I said, my voice steady and perfectly modulated. It is not a Rolex. I stood up from my chair. The room was quiet except for the soft jazz playing from the hidden acoustic speakers. I walked slowly around the large oak table until I was standing directly between Malik and Chantel. Malik looked up at me, his confident smile faltering slightly at the intense, icy expression on my face. I opened the heavy envelope. I pulled out the crisp white legal document and placed it squarely on top of his partially eaten butter-poached lobster. The expensive garlic butter immediately began to seep into the bottom of the page, but the bold black letters at the top remained perfectly legible. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Before anyone could process what they were looking at, I reached into the envelope again. This time I pulled out a glossy strip of thermal paper. It was a high-resolution ultrasound image, clearly showing two distinct fetal sacs. I dropped the ultrasound directly onto Chantel's empty dessert plate. Happy anniversary, Malik, I said. The words cut through the ambient air like shards of broken glass. Malik stared at the divorce papers, his jaw going slack. He looked down at the ruined lobster, then over at the ultrasound photo on Chantel's plate. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving him looking pale and utterly terrified. Harper, what is this? He stammered, his voice losing its previous booming masculine authority. Are you crazy? What kind of sick joke are you playing in front of our family? Chantel stared at the ultrasound photo and let out a dramatic, practiced gasp. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes darting frantically around the room. She immediately shifted into the role she played best, the helpless, fragile victim. Harper, I can't explain, Chantel cried, her voice trembling as forced tears welled up in her eyes. Please do not do this right now. We did not mean to hurt you. It just happened. We were going to tell you. But we did not know how. Ebony slammed her hands on the table, causing the expensive silverware to rattle violently. Wait a minute, she shouted, looking back and forth between her brother and my best friend. Chantel is pregnant with twins. Malik's twins? Wyatt shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face turning a blotchy red. He reached out and grabbed Ebony's arm, trying to pull her back down to avoid a public scene. Keep your voice down, Ebony. We are in a public place. He turned his gaze to me, his expression shifting into that familiar, condescending mask he always wore. Harper, you need to calm down. You are acting hysterical. Men make mistakes, it is basic biology. You cannot just throw a massive corporate marriage away over a simple lapse in judgment. Let us all sit down, take a breath, and handle this like rational adults. I turned my gaze to Wyatt, locking eyes with him until he looked away, unable to hold my cold stare. Do not ever tell me to calm down, Wyatt. You sit there begging for my money to fund your commercial real estate dreams. and then have the absolute nerve to tell me how to react to my husband impregnating my best friend. Keep your mouth shut before I decide to expose exactly how you spend your weekends when Ebony thinks you are at corporate risk seminars. Wyatt swallowed hard and shrank back into his chair, silent. Chantel was now sobbing openly, clutching her stomach, as if she needed to protect the unborn babies from my sheer presence. Harper, you have to understand my position, she wailed, her voice echoing in the private room. Malik was so lonely. You are always at your logistics hubs, always managing your supply chains. You never gave him the warmth he needed. And you know how much he wanted to be a father. He needed a legacy, Harper. He needed children of his own blood. It is not his fault you could not give him that. You are too cold, too focused on money. Someone had to give him a real family. The sheer cruelty of her words hung in the room. They all knew about my private medical struggles. They all knew about the 3 failed rounds of invasive in vitro fertilization that had left my body bruised and my spirit deeply exhausted. They knew the silent agony I had endured in private, and now my supposed best friend was weaponizing my deepest pain to justify her own disgusting betrayal. Ebony quickly rallied behind her brother, her greed overriding any sense of sisterhood. Chantel is right, Harper. You cannot just cut him off because he wanted to be a father. You chose your global businesses over giving him a family. You made him feel like less of a man. If you divorce him now, you are just proving how utterly selfish you really are. You cannot strip him of his rights just because you are bitter. I looked at the people sitting around this table. This was the family I had unfortunately married into, a group of shameless parasites who justified betrayal and demanded endless financial support in the exact same breath. They truly believed that my massive corporate wealth was their inherent birthright, and that my feelings were irrelevant. I did not scream, I did not flinch, I simply reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my solid metal black corporate card. I raised my hand and signaled the waiter who had been nervously hovering near the entrance of the private room. "Check, please," I called out, my voice ringing clear and authoritative. The waiter scurried over and presented the heavy leather billfold. I placed my black card inside and handed it back to him. Malik watched me, his eyes wide with rising uncontrollable panic. "You think you are so tough, Harper." Malik sneered, desperately trying to recover a shred of his shattered dignity. "You think you can just embarrass me and walk away? Fine, go ahead and file the papers. But Georgia corporate law is very clear. We have been married for 7 years. I am entitled to half of everything. Half of the logistics hubs, half of the commercial properties, half of the massive estate in Buckhead. And the shipping fleet is mine. My name is on the operational charter. You cannot touch my maritime business. I will drag you through federal court until you have nothing left." I waited for the waiter to return with the receipt. I signed my name with a smooth, elegant flourish, added a generous tip, and picked up my card. I turned back to Malik and offered him a smile that was devoid of any human warmth. "You really should pay more attention to the maritime documents you signed, Malik," I said softly, ensuring every word cut deep. "You do not own the shipping fleet. You never did. You are a salaried logistics director of the holding company that I established before we even got married. Your name is on the operational charter because I paid the filing fees. And as the sole owner and chief executive officer of that holding company, I am officially terminating your employment effective immediately." "You are fired, Malik." Malik's mouth dropped open. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. "You cannot do that. That is my entire livelihood." "I already did," I replied, my tone leaving zero room for debate. "Corporate security has already cleared out your executive office. Your company luxury vehicle has been repossessed from the valet parking lot downstairs. The joint business credit cards were deactivated 30 minutes ago. Oh, and about that commercial real estate cosign you promised Ebony. You might want to let her know that your current income is exactly 0. Ebony gasped violently, covering her mouth with her hands. Wyatt stared at Malik in pure, unadulterated horror, realizing his massive office space was slipping right through his fingers. I picked up my Chanel bag and adjusted the heavy strap on my shoulder. You wanted a legacy, Malik. You wanted a family with Chantel. Well, now you have it. I hope she enjoys supporting a broke, unemployed logistics director with twins on the way. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I turned and walked out of the private dining room, my stilettos clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. The silence I left behind was absolute. The war had officially begun. The heavy frosted glass doors of my office swung open with a violent force that rattled the brass hinges. There was no knock. There was no prior announcement from my executive receptionist. Ruby, my overbearing mother-in-law, marched into the room like a general invading conquered territory. She was wearing a lavender church suit complete with a matching, ridiculous wide-brimmed hat, as if she had come straight from Sunday service to deliver divine judgment. Her face was set in a mask of pure righteous fury. Ruby stopped in the center of the room, planting her hands firmly on her hips. She looked around my pristine office, her eyes dripping with absolute contempt. "You think you are God?" she demanded, her voice booming through the quiet corporate space. "You think because your name is on a few global bank accounts, you have the right to destroy my son and humiliate this family?" I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and looked at the woman who had spent 7 years treating me like an automated teller machine wrapped in a wedding dress. "You texted me last night to come home, Ruby," I said, my voice perfectly flat and devoid of emotion. "As you can see, I am at work. If you have a logistics inquiry, my receptionist can help you outside. If not, you are trespassing on private commercial property." Ruby took a heavy step closer to my desk, her eyes blazing with absolute rage. "Do not you dare speak to me like some stranger off the street, Harper. I am the matriarch of this family, and you will show me the respect I deserve. I raised Malik to be a king, and I will not let a bitter barren woman strip him of his crown just because his seed found a more fertile field." The cruelty of her words was explicitly designed to paralyze me. She wanted to use my deepest trauma to break my corporate spirit. Malik finally looked up, his face shifting into an expression of false, pathetic pleading. "Harper, please listen to my mother," Malik said, his voice adopting that smooth, manipulative tone he used when he wanted venture capital. "We can work this out. We do not have to destroy everything we built. I love you, Chantel and I just made a mistake. But the babies are a blessing. We can all be a family. You can still be a mother to them." Chantel let out a dramatic, practiced whimper from the doorway. "We can share them, Harper," she cried softly, wiping a tear that did not exist. "I know how much you want a baby. We can all live together. We can make this work for the children." The sheer delusion radiating from the three of them was physically nauseating. They truly believed I would accept this staggering level of disrespect just to maintain the fragile illusion of a happy marriage. Ruby slammed her hand flat against my glass desk, leaning over to stare directly into my eyes. "Family comes first," Ruby declared, her tone leaving zero room for argument. "Harper, you took vows before God. Men stray and men make mistakes. It is the heavy burden of a strong black woman to forgive and keep the home intact. You are not going to fire my son. You are not going to divorce him. And Chantel is carrying the blood of this family. Her apartment is too small for twins and her pregnancy is high risk. You need to let her move into the massive, suburban house in Alpharetta so she can rest. You will provide for my grandchildren, because family comes first." I stared at Ruby, listening to the echo of her ridiculous demands. They wanted my money, they wanted my property, they wanted me to fund the lifestyle of my husband and his pregnant mistress because it was my inherent duty. I slowly stood up from my chair, I smoothed the crisp lapels of my white suit, I looked at Ruby. Then at Malik, then at Chantel. "You say family comes first, Ruby," I repeated, the phrase rolling off my tongue like a heavy stone. "You stood in my kitchen 3 years ago, crying real tears, and told me family comes first." Family comes first, so I wired $100,000 to the Internal Revenue Service so your son would not wear a federal jumpsuit for massive tax evasion. Family comes first, Malik flinched, taking a sharp step back as the undeniable truth of his financial failures was laid bare in front of Chantel. Is that why family comes first when you begged me to buy that beautiful brick house in Decatur? Because the bank would not look twice at your terrible credit score. I continued, my voice rising with a rhythmic, unyielding intensity. Every single time you say family comes first, it means Harper pays the bill. Every time you say family comes first, it means I sacrifice my corporate peace to fund your delusions. I am sick of putting your family first. Ruby opened her mouth to speak, but I did not let her. I reached onto my desk and picked up the thick stack of legal documents I had been reviewing before they barged in. I tossed the papers across the glass surface until they stopped right in front of Ruby's hands. That Decatur house is in my name, Ruby, I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. My holding company strictly holds the deed. You have exactly 30 days to pack your church hats, your designer shoes that I paid for, and your absolute audacity. You have 30 days to get out of my property. I am officially initiating eviction proceedings. Ruby stared at the formal eviction notice, her mouth falling open in genuine, unfiltered shock. The realization that she was losing her comfortable home finally penetrated her arrogant armor. You ungrateful witch! Ruby shrieked, losing every ounce of her church-going dignity. You think you can throw me out on the street? I will destroy your reputation in this city. She let out a guttural scream and raised her right hand, swinging it toward my face with all the force she could muster. I did not flinch. As her hand came hurtling toward my cheek, I shot my left arm up and caught her wrist firmly in midair. My grip was exactly like iron. The momentum of her swing halted instantly, sending a shockwave up her arm. Take one more step, Malik, I warned as he puffed his chest out to intervene. Take one more step, and I will have my security guards throw all three of you through the front glass doors. I shoved Ruby's arm away in total disgust. Get out of my building and start packing your boxes. Ruby. The clock is ticking. Ruby rubbed her wrist, her chest heaving as she stared at the ruins of her own empire. She turned around without saying another word, dragging Malik and Chantel out the heavy glass doors. I stood alone in the absolute silence, finally breathing clean air. The screen flashed with an urgent emergency alert from my chief financial officer. I picked up the phone and opened the encrypted message. The words on the screen made the blood freeze in my veins. Urgent notification. All primary corporate operating accounts and global logistics funds have just been frozen. The federal bank received an emergency court injunction 20 minutes ago. We cannot process warehouse payroll. We cannot process international shipping vendor payments. All outgoing corporate transfers are blocked by order of a superior court judge. Malik and his sleazy lawyer had successfully paralyzed my entire international logistics empire with a single, massive legal maneuver. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the street below. I could see Ruby, Malik, and Chantel walking toward the parking garage. Malik stopped for a moment and looked up toward my office window. Even from this distance, I could see the arrogant, smug smile spreading across his face. He knew exactly what time the injunction was scheduled to hit my bank accounts. He knew he had just cut off my corporate oxygen. They thought they had won. They thought freezing my hundreds of millions of dollars would force me to crawl back to the negotiation table and surrender to their toxic demands. I clenched my phone tightly in my hand. I did not feel fear. The adrenaline in my system transformed instantly into a cold, calculated focus. Malik wanted to play a dirty game of financial warfare. He wanted to use the legal system to hold my global businesses hostage while his mistress carried his children. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. I picked up my office phone and dialed the direct line to my senior legal counsel. Get the entire litigation team in the main boardroom right now, I said, my voice devoid of any panic. Malik just declared war, and I am going to make sure he leaves the battlefield with nothing but they severely underestimated how many layers of financial security I had built around my empire. I told my team to immediately reroute the massive payroll through our secondary international trust, which was shielded from the injunction, and to prepare a massive countersuit for defamation and corporate sabotage. While we were sitting in the boardroom, fighting the heavy legal battle, my phone began to vibrate with endless notifications from social media. My executive assistant walked into the room, holding her tablet, looking hesitant and deeply uncomfortable. She placed the tablet on the table and told me I needed to see what was currently happening online. Chantel had just gone live on her personal page, and the video was already spreading like wildfire across the local Atlanta networks. I pressed play and watched my former best friend put on the performance of an absolute lifetime. Chantel was sitting on the edge of a bed, wearing an oversized cardigan, holding a tissue to her face, and sobbing quietly into the camera lens. She told her thousands of followers that she was carrying a heavy emotional burden and needed to speak her truth. She painted a fabricated picture of a tragic love story where she was the savior and I was the corporate villain. It broke my heart to see Malik suffering for years in a cold and loveless marriage, Chantel said, looking directly into the camera. She called me a barren workaholic who cared more about supply chains and shipping containers than building a warm home. She wiped away her fake tears and claimed that Malik only turned to her because he was starved for basic affection and desperate to have a real family with children of his own blood. She framed her pregnancy not as a disgusting betrayal, but as a divine intervention, a blessing meant to rescue a man from a miserable life with a woman who could not fulfill her natural biological duties. The sheer, staggering manipulation of her words made my stomach churn. Chantel was actively weaponizing my private medical struggles involving in vitro fertilization to make herself the ultimate martyr. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was targeting the conservative values of our community, playing the role of the fertile, nurturing mother figure against the cold, wealthy corporate CEO. The comment section beneath the video was a toxic wasteland of harsh judgment and cruel assumptions. People who did not even know me were calling me bitter and selfish. The fallout was almost immediate. Ruby was clearly working behind the scenes, calling every prayer circle and charity committee member to ensure my reputation was dragged through the mud. They were trying to break my spirit by turning my own community against me. My public relations manager desperately suggested we immediately release a statement or a counter video to defend my character and set the record straight about who actually funded Malik and his entire lifestyle. I looked at my team and told them not. I was not going to participate in a messy, undignified internet shouting match with a mistress. Fighting in the mud only gets you dirty, and it gives the pigs exactly what they want. I stated calmly, I did not need to defend myself online because my retaliation was not going to be a social media post. My retaliation was going to be structural and devastating. I dismissed the lawyers and asked my senior auditor to stay behind in the boardroom. We had some aggressive cutting to do. I asked my senior corporate auditor to stay behind in the silent boardroom. We opened the master ledger for the holding company and started digging through the extensive list of benefits and perks I had been blindly funding for the past 7 years. When you build a massively successful global business, it is easy to put things on autopay and forget about them. I had generously placed Malik and his entire extended family on my premium corporate health insurance plan years ago. I looked directly at my auditor and told him we were doing a massive cleanup of the corporate accounts right now. I instructed him to log into the benefits portal and permanently terminate every single dependent listed under my name. He asked if I wanted to wait until the end of the billing cycle at the end of the month. I told him to cancel everything immediately, effective today at exactly noon. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to an older man. He sounded tired but deeply professional. He asked if he was speaking to Harper, and I confirmed that he was. He introduced himself as Dr. Theodore Stanton, The name did not immediately register until he mentioned the specific urology clinic he used to run on the outskirts of the city almost 2 decades ago. My breath caught in my throat. I had hired a private investigator to track down Malik and his childhood medical records because something about his past had never made sense to me. Malik had always been evasive about his teenage medical history. And whenever we went to fertility specialists, he always found an excuse to avoid getting his own comprehensive testing done, placing the entirety of the blame and the painful procedures squarely on my shoulders. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, feeling the cool metal against my skin. I asked him if he had found the records, and if they confirmed so I strong suspected. Doctor, Stanton cleared his throat, and his next words changed the entire trajectory of the war I was fighting. He said he had the files sitting right in front of him on his desk. He verified the dates and the diagnosis from when Malik was just 12 years old. Then Dr. Stanton lowered his voice and asked me a question that sent a sudden, electrifying chill straight down my spine. "The medical records you requested are all here, Doctor," Stanton said, his tone serious, but given the sensitive and absolute nature of this diagnosis, "I have to ask you something before I send these over to your lawyers. Are you sure you want to open this box?" I told Dr. Stanton that I was sure. I told him to send every single page of those medical records directly to my lead attorney via a secure courier service immediately. 7 grueling months passed since that explosive anniversary dinner. The divorce proceedings became a muddy, endless trench war. Malik fought for every single penny, trying desperately to claim his imaginary half of my empire. His lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to unfreeze accounts, claiming severe financial hardship, and demanding temporary spousal support for a man who had never paid a single utility bill with his own money. Meanwhile, Chantel carried her pregnancy like a royal mandate. She posted daily updates on her social media pages, rubbing her growing belly and writing long, preachy captions about the massive blessings of true love and the resilience of a growing family. She painted herself as a beautiful martyr who had heroically rescued a good man from a cold, barren corporate wife. The women at Ruby's church ate it up. They sent organic casseroles and hand-knitted baby blankets while silently boycotting my businesses and whispering cruelly behind my back. Then the twins were finally born, 2 boys. It was the ultimate validation for Malik's fragile masculinity and Ruby's overbearing matriarchal pride. Because the divorce was still hotly disputed, and their financial resources were severely restricted by my relentless legal injunctions, Ruby and Ebony decided they desperately needed to make a grand public statement. They needed to prove to the entire elite community of Atlanta that they were not defeated and that their bloodline was victorious and thriving. So, they planned a massive, lavish yacht christening party. For those outside the elite social circles, a private yacht christening is an extravagant gathering to introduce new babies to friends, family, and the wider community, usually hosted on the deck of a rented luxury vessel. Ruby did not just want a simple gathering, she wanted a spectacle. She wanted massive ice sculptures, imported champagne, and a live string quartet playing on the top deck. She chose the most exclusive private marina in the entire city. There was only one massive problem. Malik was broke, his accounts were still frozen, and his credit score was utterly destroyed from the unpaid, expensive lawyer fees. Ruby was living in a cramped rental house on the absolute outskirts of the city because I had successfully evicted her from the beautiful Decatur property months ago. They had no legitimate way to fund a high-end marina event. They shamelessly used my corporate credit card number to secure the massive luxury yacht, and they charged an $80,000 deposit to cover the premium catering, the extravagant floral arrangements, the top-tier open bar, and the exorbitant docking fees. They genuinely thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they could actively celebrate their betrayal using the very money I had earned through my own blood and sweat. But my corporate accounting department was immaculate, and our monitoring software was state-of-the-art. The massive fraud alert hit my desk within 48 hours of the transaction. My chief financial officer came to my office and asked if I wanted him to simply reverse the charge and cancel the card to avoid any unnecessary legal hassle. I looked at the billing details and saw the exclusive marina venue named, the event date, and the specific catering notes, requesting white roses and gold-accented baby bassinets. I told my financial officer to leave the charge pending and untouched. I did not want to stop the party from happening. I wanted them to fully enjoy the party right up to the absolute peak of their arrogance before I ripped the floor out from under them. Instead of calling the bank, I called the Financial Fraud Division of the Atlanta Police Department. I filed a formal, detailed report for identity theft and massive corporate fraud, providing the exact time and location where the stolen funds were going to be utilized by the perpetrators. The day of the yacht christening finally arrived. It was a beautiful sunny Saturday afternoon. The private marina was dripping with immense wealth. I dressed meticulously for the occasion. I chose a dark crimson tailored suit that fit me perfectly, pairing it with sharp black stiletto heels. I wanted to look exactly like the executioner they never saw coming. I drove my Porsche to the marina and met two plainclothes financial fraud detectives in the VIP parking lot. They were accompanied by the general manager of the marina, who looked pale, sweating profusely, and deeply nervous about the massive financial discrepancy happening under his prestigious watch. We walked down the wooden dock and approached the massive luxury yacht. I stepped onto the deck of the massive luxury yacht, with the two detectives and the general manager walking right behind me. I did not say a single word, but my sheer presence alone was enough to shift the atmospheric pressure in the room. The church ladies closest to the boarding ramp stopped talking, their mouths dropping open as they noticed me standing there in my sharp crimson suit. The tense, heavy silence spread like a virus across the entire top deck until even the string quartet faltered, lost their rhythm, and stopped playing altogether. The sudden, awkward quiet caused Malik to turn around from the mahogany bar. The smug, confident smile on his face vanished the exact second he made eye contact with me. Ruby stepped forward, clutching her fake pearl necklace, her face contorting with immediate, highly defensive rage. "What are you doing here, Harper?" she demanded, her voice shrill and echoing in the silent marina. "You were not invited to this celebration. You have no right to show your face and ruin this beautiful day for my family, after everything you have done to us." I calmly walked toward the center of the deck, the clicking of my heels sounding like a ticking clock, counting down their absolute demise. I did not address Ruby. I turned my attention to the general manager, who stepped forward nervously, adjusting his silk tie and clearing his throat loudly. "Excuse me, everyone," the general manager said, his voice trembling slightly under the collective gaze of 100 wealthy guests. "I deeply apologize for this sudden interruption, but there is a severe administrative issue regarding the funding of this event. The $80,000 payment used to secure this yacht and the premium catering has been officially flagged as fraudulent, and the transaction has just been reversed by the issuing bank." A loud collective gasp rippled through the well-dressed crowd. The church ladies began whispering frantically behind their hands, their eyes darting between me and Ruby. Ebony, who was standing near a massive ice sculpture, suddenly looked like she was going to throw up on the teak wood deck. She knew exactly what she had done, and she realized I had finally caught her in the absolute act. Malik stepped forward aggressively, desperately trying to salvage his shattered pride in front of his wealthy friends. "What are you talking about?" he barked, looking at the manager with fake outrage. "The vessel is fully paid for. You cannot just walk on here and embarrass my family like this in front of our guests." The two plainclothes detectives stepped forward, flanking the terrified manager. They opened their jackets to prominently display their gold police badges. "Actually, sir," one of the detectives said in a calm, authoritative voice, "the payment was made using a stolen corporate credit card number belonging to this lady right here." He gestured directly toward me. "That constitutes grand theft and massive corporate fraud under Georgia law." The management of this marina has been accommodating by not immediately pressing charges and having the organizers arrested in handcuffs right this second. However, the marina requires immediate payment in full right now to cover the incurred costs. The manager nodded profusely, wiping nervous sweat from his brow. Yes, exactly, sir. If you cannot provide $80,000 in cash or a certified wire transfer immediately right this second, I have no choice but to demand that every single person leave these premises. The food service is immediately terminated, the bar is closed. If you do not vacate the property, we will have the police arrest the event organizers for theft of services and criminal trespassing. The absolute panic that washed over the deck was delicious to witness. Wyatt, the so-called superior white brother-in-law, who always acted like he was vastly better than everyone else, immediately set his expensive bourbon down and tried to subtly slip down the boarding ramp, pretending he was unaffiliated with the family. Chantal clutched the babies, looking around with wild, terrified eyes. She had desperately wanted a high society debut, and instead she was getting a highly public criminal eviction. Ruby was shaking visibly, her face turning a dangerous shade of dark purple. "Harper, you evil, vindictive woman," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You planned this just to humiliate us in front of the entire congregation." I looked at Ruby, my expression blank and utterly devoid of any mercy. "I did not plan your daughter committing credit card fraud, Ruby. I simply refused to pay the massive bill for your delusions. You wanted a lavish lifestyle to show off to your friends. You should have figured out how to actually afford it." Malik was frantically pulling out his cell phone, desperately trying to open banking apps that were frozen and drained. "I do not have it," he whispered, his voice cracking violently under the weight of his public destruction. "I do not have the money to cover this right now." The manager clapped his hands together, looking at the confused and horrified guests who were already backing away. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am so sorry, but this event is officially cancelled. Please make your way to the exits immediately." It was a stampede of extreme social embarrassment. The church ladies grabbed their designer purses and practically ran for the wooden docks, as desperate to avoid being associated with a police raid or a corporate fraud investigation. The waiters began snatching expensive plates of food right out of people's hands without apologizing. The string quartet packed up their instruments in record time and fled the scene. Within 10 minutes, the grand beautiful luxury yacht was empty except for the discarded cocktail napkins and the melting ice sculptures. The ultimate humiliation was utterly complete. Malik, Chantel, Ruby and Ebony were escorted off the yacht by the detectives, while I simply turned around and walked back to my car, feeling lighter than air. One of the twins began to cry, a high-pitched wailing sound that grated on everyone's already severely frayed nerves. "I will change him," Ruby muttered angrily, snatching the crying baby from Chantel's arms. She desperately needed an excuse to get away from the relentless arguing in the living room. She carried the fussy infant down the narrow hallway and into the small, cramped bedroom she used as a makeshift nursery. Ruby laid the baby down on the cheap plastic changing table. The room was very poorly lit, with only a single dusty lamp casting long shadows against the peeling floral wallpaper. She unfastened the matching white silk onesie, pulling the soft fabric down to expose the baby's skin. She reached for a fresh diaper from the stack, but as she looked down, her hand froze in midair. She stared at the baby's lower back. There was a strange, very distinct birthmark right above the left hip. It was a cluster of pale, irregular spots that formed a highly unique shape. But looking at this baby right now, looking at the skin tone that was significantly lighter than the other twin, looking at the facial features that suddenly seemed strikingly Caucasian, a horrifying realization washed over her. Ruby stood frozen, her face draining of color as her entire worldview shattered. She slowly turned her head toward the doorway, where Chantel had just appeared holding a bottle of warm formula. Ruby looked at Chantel, her eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of shock and sheer revulsion. Her voice trembled uncontrollably as she pointed a shaking finger at the baby lying on the table. You knew, Ruby said, her voice dropping to a dangerous mechanical whisper. You knew my son could not give you a child, you knew he was sterile, and yet you stood in my house and let us throw a party celebrating his legacy. Whose children are these, Chantel? Chantel took a trembling step backward, her eyes darting toward the locked door like a trapped animal. Those are Malik's boys, she stammered, her voice breaking with rising panic. Ruby crossed the small room in 2 massive strides. She grabbed Chantel by the collar of her oversized beige sweater and slammed her hard against the closed bedroom door. The sudden violence made Chantel drop the baby bottle. It hit the floor with a dull thud, spilling warm white formula across the ground. Do not you ever lie to me again, Ruby hissed. I am looking at a child with pale skin and features that do not belong anywhere in my family tree. I am going to ask you one more time before I drag you into the living room and let Malik tear you apart. Whose babies are these? Chantel began to sob uncontrollably, the fake tears replaced by genuine visceral terror. It was supposed to be easy, Chantel started, her voice shaking violently. Malik wanted a legacy. I thought if I could just get pregnant, he would divorce Harper and take half of her massive business empire. I used some of the money Malik gave me to visit a private fertility center. I selected an anonymous donor, someone who matched Malik's general physical profile. I scheduled the insemination during the same week Malik and I went on a romantic weekend getaway. Ruby felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead. Chantel had artificially inseminated herself just to trap Malik and steal my money. But Ruby's mind was still utterly fixated on the pale infant lying on the changing table. That explains one baby, Ruby said, her voice dangerously calm. But twins do not look different unless something else happened. That baby on the table has distinct Caucasian features, Chantel. So you are going to tell me exactly what else you did during that week? Chantel collapsed to her knees, her entire body trembling. It is a medical anomaly, Chantel cried. The doctors called it heteropaternal superfecundation. It happens when 2 different eggs are fertilized by 2 different men during the exact same ovulation cycle. It is rare, Ruby. Ruby's heart stopped completely. She stared at the pale baby on the table. And suddenly the features did not just look Caucasian. They looked horribly, agonizingly familiar. The shape of the jaw, the slight curve of the nose. Who? Ruby screamed, keeping her voice low. Who is the other father? It was Wyatt, Chantel choked out, the name hanging in the air like toxic poison. It was Wyatt, Ruby. Ebony was out of town at a real estate seminar, and Wyatt came over to my apartment to help me fix a leaking sink. We had a few drinks and things just got out of control. I never thought I would get pregnant from him. Ruby stumbled backward, hitting the wall. Wyatt, Ebony's husband, the condescending white corporate risk assessor, who looked down his nose at their entire family. Wyatt had impregnated Chantel at the exact same time she was using a donor to trap Malik. The twin boys were half-brothers with different fathers, and neither of those fathers was her son. If this truth got out, it would be an apocalyptic destruction of her entire bloodline. Ebony would be utterly destroyed, Malik would lose his mind, the church community would mercilessly feast on this scandal for decades. Harper would be vindicated. Ruby took a deep, shuddering breath and forced her heart to slow down. She grabbed Chantel by the arm, pulling her roughly to her feet. You are going to listen to me very carefully, Ruby said, her voice stripped of emotion. These babies belong to Malik. You will take this filthy, disgusting secret to your grave. Chantel, if you ever breathe a single word of this to Malik, to Ebony, or to anyone else, I will personally make sure you never see these children again. Ruby walked out the front door and stepped into the humid Atlanta evening. The sky had turned a dark, bruised purple, and heavy gray clouds were rolling in. She climbed into her car, ignoring the massive summer thunderstorm. Stripped of her pride and utterly terrified of the horrifying secrets threatening to destroy her children, Ruby had to swallow her ego and crawl back to me. She needed my money to stop the criminal investigation. The drive took over an hour in the blinding storm, But finally, Ruby turned onto the exclusive private road leading to my primary estate. She pulled up to the call box, pressing the intercom button over and over again in the freezing rain. I watched her panic from the security monitors in my study. I opened the massive oak front door just as Ruby reached the top of the porch steps. "Harper, please," Ruby said, shivering violently. "Let me come inside, we need to talk." "You can speak from exactly where you are," I replied, my voice cold. Ruby desperately shifted tactics. "Harper, we are both strong black women. I am here to ask you to end this war. Unfreeze the corporate accounts and call off the financial fraud detectives. Let Malik walk away peacefully. Just let us go in peace." I looked at her drenched, shivering form, and a slow, genuine laugh escaped my lips. "You are begging me to save your family from the consequences of their own toxic greed. You started this game, Ruby. You locked me out in the freezing rain 4 years ago over a box of tea to teach me a lesson. I am not unfreezing the accounts. You have 29 days left to get out of my house." I slammed the massive oak door shut, locking her out in the cold, unforgiving storm. The driver hurried up the long, winding walkway, keeping his head down against the biting wind. He reached the wide-covered porch, shaking the water from his jacket. He did not ring the doorbell. He simply bent down and placed the small brown package directly in the center of the welcome mat, perfectly positioned so that anyone opening the door would immediately have to step over it. The storm raged on outside. The small brown package sat quietly on the front porch, undisturbed, waiting for the morning light. Inside that unassuming cardboard box lay the absolute destruction of their marriage. The package contained 2 identical medical-grade DNA test kits. Nestled between the sterile cotton swabs and the returned shipping envelopes was a single piece of high-quality stationery paper. The note was printed in simple, bold black ink. It did not contain threats. It simply offered a devastating truth that could no longer be contained by Ruby's desperate, suffocating silence. The morning after the storm brought a crisp, cold light to the city of Atlanta. The rain had washed the streets clean, but it could not wash away the absolute delusion of my soon-to-be ex-husband. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping dark roast coffee, staring at the large flat-screen television. Malik had gone to the local media to desperately plead his case to the public. He was sitting on the plush pastel sofa of a popular local morning talk show. Chantel was sitting right beside him, holding the twin boys. "She is trying to starve us out," Malik told the sympathetic interviewer, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "She is trying to punish my innocent children just because she is a bitter, barren woman who could never give me a family of my own." He was sitting there, claiming fatherhood over 2 children that did not share a single drop of his DNA. I turned off the television. I did not feel an ounce of humiliation. I felt the cold thrill of a predator watching its prey wander blindly into a carefully laid trap. Meanwhile, Ebony walked down the carpeted stairs of her sprawling brick home. She walked toward the front door to check the mail. She unlocked the heavy door and pulled it open. She looked down and saw a small rectangular package wrapped in brown paper sitting squarely in the middle of the welcome mat. She carried the package back inside, shutting and locking the front door behind her. She walked to the kitchen island and sliced through the heavy packaging tape. Ebony stared at the colorful packaging of the medical-grade home DNA test kits, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. She unfolded the high-quality white stationery paper. The message was printed in sharp, bold black ink. "If you want to know why one of Malik's twins has pale skin and light eyes, ask Chantel exactly what happened when she called Wyatt to fix her leaking sink. The proof is in the DNA, do not let them lie to you anymore." Ebony's entire world stopped spinning. The words burned permanently into her retinas. Wyatt and Chantel and the pale baby. She remembered the afternoon Chantel had called complaining about a broken pipe in her kitchen. She remembered Wyatt offering to go over and take a look, playing the role of the helpful, sophisticated brother-in-law. She remembered how long it took him to get back home, and how he had immediately taken a rushed shower. Ebony dropped the paper onto the granite countertop as if it had suddenly caught fire. She stumbled backward. gripping the edge of the island. She pictured the second baby, the one Ruby had snatched up. The pale skin and the light eyes, a ragged, choked sob tore itself from Ebony's throat. Her husband, the man who constantly preached about superiority in corporate class, the man who looked down on her own brother for his infidelity, had been secretly sleeping with Chantel. The baby was not her nephew. The baby was her husband's illegitimate mixed-race child, born right alongside the child of an anonymous sperm donor. The absolute depth of the betrayal was bottomless. She grabbed herself phone from the counter, her hands shaking violently as she pressed Wyatt's name. She listened to the dial tone ring, waiting for her husband to answer so she could watch him burn. The morning of the divorce mediation arrived with a suffocating, thick humidity. We were seated in a massive, sterile conference room on the 30th floor of the downtown courthouse. I sat perfectly still next to my brilliant lead attorney, Marcus Stanton, keeping my posture rigid. Across the long, polished mahogany table sat Malik, wearing a custom-tailored gray suit that I had paid for. Right behind him, sitting in a row of spectator chairs, were Ruby and Chantel. And leaning against the back wall, standing like a silent stoic guardian of the family honor, was Wyatt. He was unaware of the explosive bomb currently ticking under his own expensive shoes. The mediator asked Malik's ruthless attorney to state their opening demands. The lawyer did not hold back. He demanded full ownership of my most profitable logistics hubs. He demanded a staggering $50,000 a month in permanent alimony. He spun a ridiculous tragic narrative explaining how Malik had heroically sacrificed his own entrepreneurial dreams to support my demanding corporate career. Malik nodded solemnly during the speech, actually wiping a fake tear from his eye. Ruby murmured her absolute agreement from the back row. They really thought they had me backed into an inescapable corner. They thought the physical presence of those babies was an unbreakable, emotional and legal leverage. When Malik's lawyer finally finished his dramatic 45-minute speech, the mediator turned his attention to us. Stanton did not say a single word. He simply reached into his slim leather briefcase, pulled out the authenticated red folder, and slid it smoothly across the polished wooden table. The heavy file came to a complete stop right in front of Malik. "You are not getting child support, Malik," I said, my voice echoing cleanly and sharply in the quiet room. "You are not getting the logistics hubs, and you are not getting a single dime of my money to raise those children." Malik's attorney scoffed loudly, but his voice trailed off instantly as his eyes scanned the highlighted medical text. "You have been sterile since you were 12 years old, Malik," I stated, watching his pupils dilate in sudden absolute shock. "The severe mumps infection caused irreversible damage. You have a 0 sperm count. You could never be a father." The air in the room evaporated in an instant. Malik sat paralyzed. He looked down at the official hospital letterhead, the doctor's clear signature, the undeniable biological truth of his own profound inadequacy. His large hands began to shake violently against the smooth mahogany table. His toxic pride was evaporating in front of a room full of highly paid lawyers. He slowly turned his head away from me and looked over his shoulder at his mother. Ruby had collapsed back into her chair, covering her pale face with her trembling hands. She did not deny the heavy accusation. "I am so sorry, Malik," Ruby wailed, her voice muffled by her fingers. "The doctors told me you were sterile when you were just a boy, but I could not bear to break your fragile heart. I wanted so desperately to genuinely believe it was an absolute miracle." The horrific realization hit Malik with the massive force of a runaway freight train. His entire grand legacy was a complete and absolute fraud. The children he was using to extort me were not even his actual blood. He shot out of his heavy leather chair with a terrifying burst of explosive speed, turning his terrifying manic gaze onto Chantal. "Whose babies are these?" Malik roared, the aggressive sound ripping from his throat like a wounded, enraged animal. He lunged toward her. "Whose kids are these? You lying, manipulative witch." Chantal screamed, desperately trying to scramble out of the heavy chair as the expensive lawyers tried to physically restrain him. Wyatt pushed himself off the solid back wall, stepping forward with a look of deep horror on his pale face. But before Wyatt could even reach them, the heavy double doors of the sterile mediation room were violently kicked open. Standing in the heavy doorway looking like an avenging angel of total destruction was Ebony. Her expensive clothes were disheveled and soaked with cold rain. Her bloodshot eyes were blazing with a manic, terrifying fire. In her trembling right hand, she was crushing a crumpled piece of high-quality white stationery and a brightly colored, undeniable printed DNA test result. She did not look at her broken brother. Her burning, lethal gaze was locked dead onto her arrogant husband, Wyatt, and the cowering Mistress. Ebony marched across the thick plush carpet, slamming the crumpled papers down onto the polished mahogany wood, right in front of her terrified brother's pale face. "You lied to my broken brother, and you slept with my arrogant husband." Ebony screamed. She pointed a shaking finger right at Chantel. "That pale little boy is Wyatt's." The heavy words hit the sterile room like a massive physical shockwave. Malik stared at the undeniable DNA papers. His complete legacy was nothing but a toxic byproduct of his own disgusting family's incestuous betrayal. Chantel let out a high-pitched, pathetic shriek as Ebony lunged at her. Ebony grabbed a thick handful of Chantel's carefully styled hair and yanked her backward. Ruby lunged forward, desperately scooping the crying baby up and retreating to the far corner. Wyatt, the condescending white corporate risk assessor, lost his arrogant facade. He bolted toward the heavy open double doors, hoping to escape. But Malik was fueled by incomplete rage. Malik vaulted over the heavy wooden chairs. Tackling Wyatt from behind, Malik grabbed Wyatt by the expensive collar of his suit jacket and dragged him backward. Malik raised his heavy fist and brought it down hard against Wyatt's pale face. Ebony had Chantel pinned against the side of the heavy conference table, slapping and scratching at the crying woman. It was an incredible and absolute heavy bloodbath. I did not flinch, I didn't scream. I simply sat in my heavy leather chair and watched the absolute carnage unfold with a profound clinical heavy detachment. I looked down at the heavy mediation papers sitting in front of me, demanding my profitable logistics hubs and $50,000 a month. I calmly picked up the heavy gold fountain pen. I drew in thick, dark, heavy lines straight through their ridiculous, aggressive demands, crossing out every extortion attempt. On the final page, I signed my name with slow, deliberate strokes. I stood up, I turned my back on the screaming mass of bodies, I walked out of the mediation room and pulled the heavy oak doors shut behind me. The heavy weight of the last 7 years vanished from my shoulders. The nightmare was finally over. In the weeks that followed, the false empire collapsed. Malik went bankrupt, drowning in legal debt. Ebony filed for divorce, and Wyatt was fired from his firm. Ruby was evicted and shunned by her church. 6 months later, I stood in the bright lobby of my newest logistics hub. The mayor was next to me for the ribbon cutting. Malik called from a burner phone. I pressed the block button. I cut the ribbon and walked into my future. The ultimate lesson from this narrative is that your worth is never defined by toxic people.